Hello, my name is Mike Moran. I'm your instructor for Communications 395, Communications and Community Advocacy. A 395 class, like a 495 or 595 class, is an elective class. It's designed for the student to have a broad survey of real information, and this class will have a lot of information. We'll be doing 3 large tasks in this class. The first is going to be a fairly comprehensive review of communications theory, including the fact that you'll be dealing with all types of materials, practices, classes that you've used previously if you're a communications major. That is to say, public speaking, small group communication, persuasion, informative. Also, we're going to look at social media and contemporary broadcast media. The second large piece of this class is going to be just that, looking at advocacy, including lobbying. Lobbying is a legal term. Advocacy is a communications term, and advocacy covers a lot of ground. Third, after all the reading of 3 books, the lectures, the interview segments, you, the student, will, either as yourself or with a team, go ahead and create a communications plan and a lobbying plan for either a real problem that you found in the community or an action plan for a business organization that you're taking on as a project. This class will run through October. There will be 8 lectures from me. There will be 4 interview segments, plus a lot of material I'll be putting onto the web page. This is an online class. This is important to understand. The materials that you need will always be on Moodle. They'll always be on the class's web page. It is critical for you to use communications to me, whether it's email or calling me. You have my contact information. I hope you will enjoy this class. I intend to really drive hard to get through this in the 9 weeks that we have, and I hope you'll understand that what you do for a living when you leave communications will involve everything that we talk about here today. This class is a real practicum, and I hope you are excited to take it as I am to give it. Anyhow, I'll start into the lecture here in just a moment. A summary about Communications 395. We're going to look at how individuals and organizations have developed advocacy over the last 100 years. We're going to look at the technologies that are in use today that are fundamentally different than those of even 20 years ago. We're also going to examine the definitions of crisis management, information management, advocacy, lobbying. Finally, after all this information you've received and processed, and listened to the interviews and the talks that I and others will give to you, we will set you on the task of creating your final project, which will be a communications plan of either a real problem that's happening in our community or a problem that you have developed that you will bring forward as your plan. So let's talk about the textbooks that I'm asking you to look in this class. The first one is from Burton Levine, The Art of Lobbying and Policymaking. It is a textbook that has a lot of stories and a lot of reports of not just lobbying, working with congressional staffs, the role of staff, the type of members of Congress. It is a very good contemporary look at the state of Congress and federal lobbying at this time. The second book is from Goodwin and Ainsworth and Goodwin, which is Lobbying and Policymaking, the Public Pursuit of Private Interests. In this book, particularly when you get to chapters 9 and 10, where it talks about building a model of lobbying and the contemporary state of affairs in lobbying at the federal level, I think you'll find it most instructive. This book actually has a mathematical model of trying to determine a policy strategy and what you should do with the problem. For me, it's a bit much. I've been in lobbying for over 20 years. I've been in politics for 33. I do believe that the situation in community organization, community communications, public relations, advertising is far more reactive. It is really a function of how I meet with you, discuss the problem, try to figure out what the solutions are. But the book is excellent in giving you a depth of analysis of how the system works and how it doesn't. The last book is Crisis Communications in a Digital World. This is actually a May 2015 book. It is a case book. Case books you normally see in law school, where you have a series of problems and the academic treatment of how these professionals solve their problems. Now, this book is Australian. The problems are Australian. Why would that be a problem? It's not. Australia had a banking crisis. We can look at it through the eyes of what happened in this country. Australia's had public health and natural disasters. We can look at their crisis management through our eyes and see if their solutions would have been superior or inferior. It also talks a great deal about the use of social media. And as all of you know, that is an ever-changing communications format. We'll be looking at it, and you will be explaining to me, as your client, when you do your final project, on how your social media strategy would work and how it is set up and organized. Those are the types of things that we'll be doing with these 3 textbooks. So, the course objectives. How does this whole online class thing work? Well, the goal of this class is for the student to understand the basics behind advocacy campaigns, lobbying, and political messaging. We'll be working through the university's Moodle system, and we'll also be using through selected video channels to upload links. The university doesn't have enough bandwidth in its computer system for you to shoot your own video presentations and to upload them into the university system. That's why Moodle has an option for a URL. So you will put the YouTube address or Vimeo address or whatever account you use, you will post that to the class, and that is how we will look at your video work. You do have a paper in this class, and you'll just submit that to me via email. You will follow all the standard university academic and moral obligations for academic performance. That is to say, first and foremost, your work is your own. As an introduction to speech teacher, I've had students put 5-minute videos into their 10-minute speech hoping that I wouldn't mind, that over 60% of the work wasn't theirs. Well, I do mind. I expect you to do your own work and to do it well. You expect the same from me, so I at least ask the same from you. So, I was going to start in with Week's 1 schedule and Week 1's lecture, which is going to be on the definitions of crisis communications and defining lobbying. What is crisis communications? Crisis communications, excuse me as I refer to my own tablet for notes because I like to get the definitions correctly. The term is most often used to describe an organization facing a crisis and the need to communicate that crisis to stakeholders and the general public. So, if there's a fire at a building, if a product's been recalled, if there's a congressional investigation that would undermine the safety and comfort of that company and its customers, that is often when the organization will step up and act on that crisis. Crisis communication can be simply the effort to inform the public that they must evacuate in advance of a hurricane. The underlying thread of crisis communication is that communicating organizations are experiencing an unexpected crisis and must respond. So, crisis communications, just that. External threat, must act. Issues management communication, which is very similar to crisis communication. However, the organization has the luxury or foreknowledge of an impending crisis and has the opportunity to act in advance. A good example of that is when a business, let's say a food manufacturer, is found by either an administrative agency or a court of law to have poisoned a whole bunch of people. Well, they have a problem and they have to communicate about it. So they have the advantage of working on the timing of that situation to figure out how best to handle it. Also, and the third big group is risk communications. Risk communications is, again, crisis communications, but of a different nature. It's a field that's flourished in the last 20 years, mostly through environmental health and other disclosures. So in these cases, the organization, whether it's the government regulatory agency or the business themselves, and again, one of the best examples are food poisoning notices, salmonella in chicken, listeria in vegetables or salads, where you'll hear from the local news organization a press release generated by either the government regulatory agency, Department of Health, or by the company itself saying, hey, these batches of spinach have have listeria in them and you shouldn't eat them. And that's when you see the bin numbers and everything else. So risk communication, again, is a measure by the organization itself to inform the media of an alert and that they should take steps to protect themselves. Here's a good example of risk communication that's in our world today. Go back to your computer after this class and go ahead and Google identity theft and hacking. And you will find all the examples of risk, issue management, and crisis communications. The most recent example is the theft of 21.5 million identifications of federal current employees and contractors, like myself, from the United States Department of Personnel. The Bureau of Personnel handles all security clearances. In this case, the federal government had moved its database away from its secure office and management budget computer systems over to the Department of Interior, which had adequate space. However, the Department of Interior did not even inventory its software, let alone its security measures. And that is how it's believed the Chinese government was able to breach and take out 21.5 million people's identities and disrupt a lot of people's lives. The Sony Incorporated communications hacking case of last summer, when hackers started spilling out emails of Hollywood stars and how they tended to talk bad about each other. And of course, the biggest case of all probably is Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks. All of these are examples of where an event or an action by an entity that turned out to end badly created a torrent of communications between themselves and us, either through the media or directly. That's when you get those letters from insurance card companies or health insurance companies say, you know, "Dear Bob, I'm terribly sorry to let you know that your insurance and your credit ratings have been breached by a third party. We're terribly sorry." It's something to think about on a personal level too. So many times when we buy software, we do software upgrades, we sign away large parts of our privacy for that implementation. And I think once you go through this class and look at crisis communications and look at people trying to manage the environment, you'll begin to look at those disclosures a little more carefully, because I know I have. So, emergencies, disasters, crises. These are the things that create crisis communications and crisis management. They can be of all sorts of consequence, from a breach of data at the local bank to a catastrophic disclosure that all the cars made by a manufacturer, all of them are dangerous. We've seen those examples throughout the media and throughout the newscasts of the last year. Okay. So, we've talked about crisis communications, which for most of us is going to be business and government's reactions to problems that they are facing. But what about advocacy and lobbying? Again, this class has three big spheres that it's working on. It's working on understanding corporate and organizational communications to the public. It's going to be talking about the rules that are in place to have us understand what they are doing, and also having you understand how you as an advocate can best affect a situation, solve a problem, or change the world. So what is public policy advocacy? You know, this is a lot of ground when you think of advocacy. This is not just lobbying Congress. It's also public interest, health and safety, child welfare issues, individuals approaching government corporations and change zoning decisions, and other policies are just a few examples. From Oregon's nonprofit charities page is the best example I have found. Advocacy encompasses a wide range of activities that influence decision makers. Advocacy includes traditional activities such as litigation, lobbying, and public education. It can also include capacity building, relationship building, forming networks, and leadership development. Lobbying refers to activities that are intended to influence a specific piece of legislation. So lobbying is just a small part of advocacy, and advocacy is a word that covers a broad range of activities. Lobbying is a legal definition. I've given you a resource to look at, which is from the National Council of State Legislatures, and it's all 50 states' summaries of lobbying regulations, registrations, and limitations. But for Washington, you go to Washington's code, which is RCW 4217A-005. Lobbying and lobbying each mean to attempt to influence the passage or defeat of any legislation by the legislature of the state of Washington, or the adoption or rejection of rules, standards, rates, or other legislative enactments by any state agency under the State's Administrative Procedures Act, Chapter 3405 RCW. Neither lobby nor lobbying includes an association's or other organization's efforts of communicating to members of that particular organization. Why is that important? Lobbying usually involves money. Most lobbying and disclosure laws are money laws. You either show who's paying you, or you show where the money's going, you show what the money is doing. Advocacy, everything from the Koch brothers down to the PTA, is not lobbying by legal definition, because it's generally messages sent to the general public about a problem. And for the most part, these organizations, except for these political organizations that we've seen of late do not make political organizations. This class does not have the time to go into U.S. tax law to explain the differences, but suffice it to say, advocacy is going to be what you think your friends are doing. Lobbying and special interests are the organizations that are opposed to you. It's a function of human nature. We like our friends, we want to help our friends, and we don't want to help those that we think are against our base interests. Lobbying is as old as togas. People have been addressing redress from their government and asking for help from their government since the times of, since the times of Gaius Marius. It's well before Julius Caesar. It's functional. We talk. We ask our government for help. We advocate for changes amongst our government. So the conclusion for today, we're going to be tracking the nature of communications managed by the events themselves. How do events drive communication behavior? We'll also explore the nature of advocacy and lobbying, its regulations, and the aspects that are not regulated. It's best for you to understand the box that we are putting ourselves in for the course of this class. It's important to understand the value of public disclosure, transparency, and how they're all used by interested parties. Public disclosure and transparency is used by a weapon by those who want to expose the flaws of others. So do not try to put a moral value on public disclosure or transparency. Try to treat it as an objective state or situation, and it'll be much easier to understand the role of information and money at solving a political problem. The growing use of social media as a marketing and political tool will be of great study. Even as I speak today, on the 27th of July, social media is changing everything that we are doing. And there will be changes as we go through this class over the last 9 weeks. So that concludes our first class lecture. I will start going through the book in detail in our second lecture, and you'll be seeing interview subjects here very shortly. Thank you for your attention, and have a good day.